Deputy Murphy, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Can we say another 10 minutes? Or?
I think I'll be longer than that, Chair. So if we can we request a break, if that's suitable? I mean, Mr. Maloney, if you're in agreement, I mean...
We'll need a break, Chairman, but I prefer to continue if we could,
yeah.
and finish it. Because
it's just I'd like to continue on into the details of the minutes of the 24th of October, and also then into some of the board meetings that happened subsequent to the bid being made, and then to look at the capping issue in relation to the liability that was meant to be capped at a 2-year period, but was then extended indefinitely until now stepped in. So, just because I think it's important to the report. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Maloney, for being here and for answering the questions in the way that you have. It's come up a few times now in the course of the different interventions that have been made. And I just want to say, and we're not coming to any conclusions in this meeting, but I think it's important just to reiterate that the sanction that came from the Department of Environment, which had come through the Department of Finance, dated the 24th of October, Ray ministerial approval related to property acquisitions in Docklands, does state that there is approval for borrowing by the authority up to the statutory limit of 127 million. But in the second paragraph, it also states that with the consent of the Minister for Finance, the Department is giving approval for the taking by the authority of a shareholding in a joint venture company. So it wasn't just approval to borrow, it was approval to enter the joint venture. I think it's important to have that clarified just in the record before we do our final report. When you went to the meeting on the 23rd of October with Mr. McNamara, you brought Laura Bradshaw, the chairman, because you felt it was, I think you said, the biggest decision for the board to make. At the meeting of the 20th of October, in paragraph 1.3, we have the executive recommend that the authority should make a joint bid. So the executive, by this point, in the meeting of the 3rd of October earlier, we discussed how there were, as the executive was recommending that you would open discussions or formal negotiations on making a bid.
With a number of caveats,
yes, but by the 20th of October, we are now saying, or you are now saying, we are going to we recommend to the board that the authority make the bid.
With a number of caveats, yes.
Yes.
The caveat stated in paragraph 1.3?
Yes, but that is the recommendation. Just 26%, and the bid is between 275 to 375 million. Was there any hesitation on the board or any voice of dissent at that time?
None.
None?
Not one.
And in your recollection from the meeting of the 24th of October, was there any hesitation or any voice of dissent at the board level?
No. The only hesitation was in relation to the additional bid that the other venture partner was about to make above our bid.
So it was a hesitation as to not the actual the bid being made, but whether the bid was the best bid?
No, that the bid was our bid and our valuations and our limit were 375, and you're not getting comfortable with a bid above that and making sure that any bid above that was totally at the risk of the other party.
Okay. And then just in that recommendation that you make in that 20th of October meeting, you talk about a range of 275 to 375 million for the bid.
Correct.
That seems like a big variation between those two numbers.
Yes.
I mean, it's significant.
Yes.
Why is that?
It's significant because, and you're absolutely correct, Deputy Murphy, in coming to a final decision of what the bid would be, we had valuations that you've already gone through. I won't repeat those. And secondly, we didn't know and didn't bottom out who we were bidding against and what. At the end of the day, you're not bidding on a valuation. You're bidding on beating other bidders. And therefore, these are public minutes, and this is a public statement. We had to be very careful not to give. This could have been a public document the next day. Under FOI, it's entitled to be. We'd be very careful not to show to anybody else what the exact bid would be, because you're still, trying to guess what other bidders will do. And that's why there's a range.
Okay. And, I mean, it seems to me, though, then, you pick a range, but it's up to then Mr. McNamara to decide what the actual final bid is.
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Although we're picking a range on the 20th of October, which you're referring to there, by the 24th, we were absolutely certain of our limit, which was 375. There was no more ranges after that.
Okay.
We were picking 375. In fact, on the board meeting of the 20th, the decision was made, if you look at the minutes of that, to fix at 375, paragraph 2.1.
Of the 20th of October?
Yes. Paragraph 2.1 of the minutes of the 20th of October.
Sorry, I was looking at the acquisition paper, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
2.1. Yes, the board agreed to an upper limit of 275 million. And then how was that communicated to Mr McNamara, that your upper limit was 375?
Absolutely. When myself and Mr Bradshaw went to meet him, we asked, first of all, we asked him for his thoughts on it, and he said over 400 million. We said absolutely not. We're 375.
But it's 375 is the upper limit on the 20th of October. The bid is on the 25th.
Correct.
You wait until the 23rd to inform Mr McNamara of what your upper bid limit is.
Yes, because that was the next meeting, was the 23rd. I mean, we asked for that meeting.
But would you not think to inform him by telephone sooner? That
No, I wanted, as I said earlier, I wanted the full board to be aware we were now entering legal and financial territory. I wanted someone with me. I wanted no phone calls. In fact, if you look at all these records, everything's recorded. I had no phone calls here. I wanted someone with me to inform Mr McNamara what the decision of the board on the 20th was.
And so the meeting of the 23rd, just to be absolutely clear, was arranged at your instigation,
My
not his.
request, absolutely.
And when was that actually requested, that meeting?
I believe I would have, Friday was the 20th, if you look at that, at 8 a.m. So probably during that day, I would have rang him and said, are you available on the Monday, which would have been the 22nd, and then the Tuesday...
The 23rd was the Monday, I think.
23rd was a Monday, so
Sorry.
it was the next available date, is it?
Yes.
Yes, it's the next available date.
So you spoke to Mr McNamara on the phone on the
I probably
20th?
would have spoken to his secretary, probably not him.
Probably not him.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was no attempt by Mr McNamara to get in touch with you over the course of the weekend in relation to any information
No,
on his side of the
absolutely
table?
not. I wouldn't have entailed that.
Because obviously he was having discussions with his banks and things
Absolutely.
were changing. Yeah. So you arranged the meeting for Mr McNamara. You invited Mr Bradshaw along on the 23rd. We've already been through actually what the discussions that you had there. And I mean, we heard Mr Bradshaw's reaction to the bid exceeding 400 million, and he was surprised, I think, at that at the time.
Who was
Mr Bradshaw, I beg your pardon.
Well, we were both.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say surprised because we in our head had seen valuations of 400 million. We were very resolute that we weren't going beyond 375.
So in that meeting with Mr McNamara, the two issues that were discussed were the bid figure and the change in the lending circumstances for Mr McNamara's side.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that more time was devoted to talking about the change in his lending circumstances?
No, most time was about the valuation.
About the valuation?
Yes.
Okay. But in relation, though, to because it appears immediately once you hear this information from Mr McNamara, there's going to be conflicts of interest. Laura Bradshaw has one immediately. Well, perceived or actual. I mean, that's a point of debate. And then there's going to be another one on the board with Mr Sean Fitzpatrick as well, and with Mr Declan McCourt.
And should I add that we had already decided the board meeting was going to be 8 a.m. the next morning.
That was already happening.
That was already happening.
And as you said, or Mr Bradshaw had said, or perhaps you said in your opening statement, documentation was already prepared and everything
Correct.
else. And we've already been through, in this meeting and previous meetings, what happens with actual conflict then and how it's dealt with in the course of the meeting the next morning, the telephone conference call. But did you and Mr Bradshaw have a discussion, either with Mr McNamara or following that meeting, about this perceived conflict of interest issue
No,
that would arise?
absolutely not. We left immediately after the meeting.
You left separately, didn't talk about it.
Absolutely, no discussion.
The first discussion there was 8 a.m. the next morning.
8 a.m. the next
24th.
morning. The chairman, on leaving on Tuesday night, said, or on Monday night, I'm going to raise the issue of this new development immediately at the beginning of the meeting. I had no discussion on it, and he did.
Would it be fair to say, or to assume perhaps, that then Mr Declan McCourt was hearing about this change for the first time?
For the first time,
24th.
absolutely certain. Yeah.
And Mr Sean Fitzpatrick as well?
Well, to my knowledge, yes.
To your knowledge, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And you're not aware of any contacts between Mr McNamara and either of those two individuals
None.
prior to
None.
that meeting on the 24th?
To my knowledge, Deputy Murphy, none.
Okay.
Nor would I have entertained it.
Did anyone talk about objective bias in that meeting on the October 24th?
No, they talked about perceived conflict and actual conflict. They're the two words that were used.
But not
Bias
objective.
was not used.
Okay. Okay. That wasn't discussed. Now, just if I could look at the minutes then for the meeting of the 24th. So the authority's valuation is suggesting a reasonable figure at 375 million, and that's in paragraph 5.2. So the valuation, 5.2. Then the board agreed, if we look at paragraph 8.1, that the tender bid should be in the sum of 411 million. It's 8.1. Following a long discussion, etc., the board agreed that the tender bid should be in the sum of 411 million.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's
So
correct.
the executive's recommending 375 and the board arrives at 411.
Yeah.
Two questions. How did we get from 375 to 411? And are the minutes making a distinction between what the executive thinks is appropriate and what the board thought was appropriate?
Okay. Do you mind, I'm sorry, just repeating what was the first part?
First question was, how do we move from 375, which is what was recommended previously,
sorry.
to 411?
Do you mind if I just take that on its own?
Yeah,
first?
absolutely. Yeah.
So at the meeting with Mr. McNamara on the night of the 23rd, we reiterated the price we would go to maximum was 375. He actually talked about a price greater. It's on the bottom of that page of 437. We thought that was ludicrous and should not be done. And he then said, okay, I will bring it back himself to 411 million. These were his statements. So what we were bringing back to the board, that we were stuck resolutely to 375 million. He had moved from 437 down to 411, and the actual numbers, why he picked 411, was his choice. And there's where the figure appeared from.
Okay. And are you making a distinction in the minutes between the executive and the board and what they thought was an appropriate bid? If the board is saying that McNamara can go to 411, but I'm just trying to, I mean...
Yes, I see your point. Yes, we're not deliberately making that distinction.
At the time, there was no... The board wasn't in dispute, I suppose, with the executive. No. Okay. Now, if we continue in paragraph 8.1, and we look down just a little bit further, it says that if he, and that's referring to McNamara, had some additional information which convinced him that the bid should be increased, then the board agreed that Mr. McNamara could be allowed to increase the bid as he saw fit, up to a maximum of 437 million. What does that mean, if he had some additional information which convinced him that the bid should be increased?
Well, when we reported back that his initial concept was 437, we didn't delve into what were the parameters to get to that 437, except for his valuations.
The details of why he thought 437.
No, he just said his valuations,
not any
which
other...
we didn't agree with.
Okay.
And therefore, when the board said, well, how did he get 437? We said, other than his own valuations, which we hadn't a copy of at the time, that's where he would have got it. And the board said that he could be allowed to increase if he had information in those valuations, which we didn't have in ours patently, because ours was 375, then it was up to him to make that bid, which he ultimately did not do. Because I presented the reasons why we were limiting it to 375 to him, and I think that caused him to rethink his valuations.
Okay. So, I mean, if you look then at the figure communicated to the minister, which we accept was a mistake and which is rectified, but only at the 11th hour, in my opinion, the 11th hour, it's 24th of October. We're a long way from the 220 million. We're even a long way from the 375 million when we're talking about a figure like 437 million. Mr. Bradshaw, when he was before us, he put it that 50% of a large number was the same as 25% of a small number. So it wasn't really an issue in terms of what the board was entering into. And if you look at this particular deal in terms of the potential exposure, and we touched upon it briefly earlier, the fact that we had moved from a 49% shareholding in a joint venture worth 220 million, potentially, to a 26% shareholding in a venture now worth around the 400 million figure, and the final bid was 412. That I think Mr. Bradshaw, and not to put words in his mouth, was kind of saying in terms of the borrowing facility, we were still dealing with the same amount of money that was needed.
Well, of course, we were dealing with 50%, because the borrowing at 50% of 220 million is 110 million. Yeah. Now our borrowing is down to 50 million. It's not the same. It's considerably reduced.
Well, sorry, because he was making the point that 25% of 400 million was going to come in at around...
Well, it wasn't 25% of 400 million. I'm surprised you made that point. It was 25% of 375 million.
Sorry, I mean, we were talking in rough figures, but I think he did make the point that, in terms of what was being sought in terms of sanction from the department, that even though the size of the bid, as they were aware, had increased dramatically, that because the percentage that was being taken in the joint venture had decreased, that it was basically the same thing.
Well, to be fair, I think Ms. Moylan made that point on her ministerial sanction. I wasn't aware Mr. Bradshaw made
Confusing the two transcripts.
I think so. I don't think Mr. Bradshaw would have said that.
Okay. And do you accept that, what Ms. Moylan says in her view of that? That's
I accept that that was her reasoning, and I accept that's what she put to this committee. And that's
okay. Thank you. I want to move now, if I can, to what happens after the meeting of the 24th of October. The bid is made on the 25th at 412 million. And when did you learn of that figure for 412 million?
on the morning of the 25th.
And how did you learn of that figure?
I communicated to Mr. McNamara the absolute position of the board. That was probably definitely a phone call,
Yeah.
because time was very short.
I had a phone call with Mr. McNamara or with his
Yes,
staff?
directly to Mr. McNamara. Well, I rang his staff and they put me through. And I said, the board have made a decision, we will not be bidding over 375, because he continued to exhort us to do that, to move. We wouldn't.
Continue to do that.
Well, when we met him the night before, he said, I'll want to bid 437 and you're 26%, so we want you to go with us. We said, absolutely no.
Okay.
We are mitigating our risk to 375. So I rang him to confirm. Remember, the night before it was only the chairman and me. I had to give him a board decision. The board, I confirmed the board had mitigated the risk to 375 and we weren't moving. To be fair, I think I would have made it clear to him, despite what you read there, that really 411 was his risk. And my intimation is that that's all he was really going to do from the night before. Although the board made that comment, my view was he was only going to go 411, which was subsequently, he went 412, I think. I don't know where there's a difference. But I communicated to him the board position that was given to me at 8 a.m., 9 a.m. that morning.
And then when did he tell you that he was going to go back? And I mean, the bid was at, I think, midday on 25th.
I don't have the time, but I think
When did he tell you what his actual bid figure was going to be?
on that call.
On that call, he said,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
I'm going to go for 412.
Well, to be honest with you, I would have made it very clear that that's what we expected to be maximum.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then did you then go back and inform the board of that?
That day was the bid. Yes, I would have probably not circulated to the entire board, but informed Mr. Bradshaw.
That you had agreed with Mr. McNamara?
Not that I'd agreed, but that he had agreed that his risk would not go above 411 because ours was already set.
Okay. And when then did you learn that the bid was successful?
Tenders would have been, I don't have that information, but in the normal course of events, the assessment of tenders would have taken about a week. So I'm assuming, without being accurate, Deputy Murphy, if it's important for me to be accurate, I would have to go to records.
Okay.
But I would say about a week.
About a week you would have
I
learned
would
that you
have
were
thought it would
successful?
have taken that long to assess tenders, yes.
Okay. Because we then moved back to what is a normal board meeting on the 2nd of November,
Yes.
in terms of the 24th, meeting on the 24th telephone conference being an exceptional one in terms of finalising the bid. And in that meeting, you approve and amend the minutes from all the October meetings, the 3 October meetings, October board meetings, excuse me. The IGB side is discussed. It's under paragraph 6.1 in the minutes on the
Yes.
2nd of November.
Yes.
And then we hear, there's a paper circulated on the 1st of November, but then we hear that Derek Quinlan has become involved in the venture.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. After the bid went in, and it looks now at this stage we're aware that the bid was successful. I can't be sure as I quickly read the minutes, but I think that would probably have been a decision already given to us. I can't be certain because I'm reading the minutes very quickly.
Yeah, because that's what I couldn't find either. Anything
Yes,
noting
we're
that
aware.
the board noted that the
Well, let me
successful, the bid
quickly,
was successful.
Stephanie, so that I don't mislead you in any way, let me quickly look at the meetings of the 2nd of November, which is
That's
kindly
fine,
put
yeah.
here, and let me look at that paper which is referred to here. Yes, on the top of paragraph 1 of the board paper of the 2nd of November, 4 lines down, a bid was tendering a figure of 411 million, and this was accepted.
Okay,
So we now know.
I haven't seen that paper, thanks.
We
But
now
yes,
know.
so in the meeting on the 2nd of
Yes.
November, you now know the bid was successful.
Yes.
But you,
In being informed that it was successful, I'm recalling as best I can, I would have either met Mr. McNamara or he would have informed me because he was the bidder. It was not under our heading. He would inform me of the bid, and I'm fairly certain that within a day or so of that, so we are talking about very close timescales, he rang back to say he wanted to mitigate his risk by bringing in a third partner, Mr. Derek Quinlan, which we immediately informed the board about.
so you immediately inform Mr. Bradshaw when you hear that?
No, at
No.
this stage, I literally think we were against the board meeting, so we put it, it's probably in the paper. Yes, it is. So we had written it into the paper that was circulated to the board. This is the Thursday the 2nd. That would have been circulated possibly on the 31st of October
Okay.
Or the 1st of November.
Okay.
So, to be honest, I don't think I phoned Mr. Bradshaw. I simply circulated this.
Okay. And any discussion with Mr. Bradshaw or any of the board members before the board meeting of the 2nd of November in
No.
relation to the Quinlan
No.
involvement?
None.
So what was the reaction of the board then to this news?
Well, it was, as you can see, the positive and negatives indicated in 2.2 and 2.3, particularly the negative.
I haven't actually seen that paper, sorry.
Sorry, yes.
So
This is the one for the paper. For the
do we have it
board,
on the
paper to the board on the 2nd of
circulated to the
November?
board?
Do you want to, can you put it up now? But on paragraph 2.2 or 2.3, can I just read it to you?
Please
Deputy
do,
Murphy?
yeah.
So it says, on Tuesday the 24th of October, the executive advised that he wished to, actually, I'm sorry, I have to correct myself, it now states a date, we were told by Derek Quinlan.
Okay.
He advised that he wished to pass some of his shareholding to a consortium led by Derek Quinlan. The executive resisted this on the basis that no decision had been taken by the board in respect of same. In other words, he was asking me, or one of my team, on the 24th, could he bring in Derek Quinlan in advance of the bid? And we said no. The board had not discussed it, he could not do it.
Sorry, he said
Yes.
to you that he wanted to bring in Quinlan in
Yes.
advance of the bid?
Yes,
And when
on
did
the
he-
same day after the board meeting on the 24th.
So later on that day, the 24th?
Later on that day, in advance of the bid, he suddenly sprung on us, he'd like to bring in Derek Quinlan. I said no.
Did he contact you, or was that what you contacted him to talk about the bid?
It was probably the same phone call that
Okay.
we discussed, is it 411 million? That's the board decision.
And sorry, that phone call you think took place on the 24th, not the 25th? The
Yes,
24th,
I'm
day
sorry.
before the bid.
I'm
yeah.
sorry, I
Yeah.
now
No, that's fine,
correct
that's fine.
myself. Yeah. So the executive resisted. I resisted this on the basis the board was not aware of this, the board was not party to it. And we said that, I'll just read the last line, the executive agreed it would bring the matter to the board on the first of opportunity, which was the 2nd of November. But we also highlighted in that paper the positive and negatives of Quinlan coming in. And particularly in the negative is that we were dealing up to now for 20 days with one joint venture leader, Mr. McNamara, and we were comfortable with that. And now we were going to deal with another investor whom I knew absolutely nothing about, and therefore I had to look at the criteria that I'd applied to the other investor before recommending this to the board.
Did it worry you that at the very last moment, when you're
Absolutely.
deciding a bid,
It worried me from the perspective I didn't know who Mr. Quinlan was. I'd never heard of him. I didn't know who this was. And I immediately said no.
did it undermine your trust in Mr. McNamara?
No, because as the days emerged, just like Anglo, franchised out their risk to AIB, the fact that we were only 26%, he was now 74%, it made sense that in one of the biggest deals, not his biggest deal, but one of the biggest deal, he would seek to franchise it out. It made sense as he explained it to me. And I got a little more comfortable. I was totally uncomfortable. Been informed about this on the day we were to bid, and I rejected it.
But you were probably then aware that, should the bid be successful, he would then try to involve
Yes,
Mr.
absolutely.
Quinlan.
Yeah.
Did you not feel an obligation to inform the board members of the moving chairs at this late stage, that the changing circumstances, that although you had resisted, and I take that point, that this was likely going to change the relationship post-agreement?
To be honest, I thought when I said no, that it wouldn't emerge again.
Okay.
Perhaps that was naive. But I didn't honestly think of that between the 24th and the 2nd.
Okay.
I didn't think of that.
Okay.
But it wasn't uppermost in my mind. Uppermost in my mind was the heads of terms that we now had to finalise and to ensure that our conditions and criteria were in there. So you are right. I did question it, and I did say there was a negative to it, and I wanted the board to know that there was an uncomfortableness about it.
Just on that point.
Yeah.
Are you telling us that you actually didn't know who Derek Quinlan was?
Never heard of him.
Like, he was one of the biggest property developers.
I had never heard of him.
Never heard of him?
Never. And I had, when the name came up, it simply went over my head. I'd been working in social regeneration in the Northeast City. I had been dealing with all the tax incentive sites, all the social blocks in those areas. On not one occasion did the name of Derek Quinlan ever cross my desk.
You were going into but you're telling me that you dealt with all the large developers.
My team did. I had only just arrived.
But just on a quick note, and I know, Deputy, that, like, Is there a possibility that, Mr. Maloney, that vanity took over from sound commercial judgment on your part, that this was a huge project, enormous regeneration within an area, and that, like, how long were you in the job when this particular...
I think I was about 3 months.
And so, when did you join Dublin
Oh,
Docklands?
sorry, wait, no, this is 2006, so sorry, I was a year in the job, yes, and I'd never dealt or heard of Mr. Quinn, who had never developed in Docklands, never, up to that point.
When you got the evaluation back in June '05, were you in this job at that point?
No, no, I think I came in very close to that timing, just after that timing perhaps.
Like, I suppose the key points really, and I'll let Deputy Murphy conclude, but the key point really is that if this project hadn't gone ahead, there would be 52 million additional funding available to Dublin Docklands to do projects, amenities for people in the area. And furthermore, any money that Dublin Docklands earns, we'll say in its final incarnation, goes back to the Exchequer. So the question really is that, going back to it, that the whole thing appears to have been enormously rushed. And like everything in life, when things are rushed, normally an alarm bell goes off in a person's head and they pull back. Did it not strike you that you had all these various different things happening? You had different banks being brought in. This isn't personal in anyone. You had different developers being brought in at the 10th hour. You had variations in value. You had differences in terms of letters going to the department in terms of the valuation being put in the property. Did it not, at some stage, strike you, you know what, I think we should pull back from this? Because, like, this was clearly of its size an enormous project. And I suppose the question I'm posing to you is that, did it become a vanity project for you, Mr. Maloney?
Absolutely not, Deputy. And if I could take the 4 issues that you raised that might have raised the alarm with me. A developer coming in, a number of banks there, the number of valuations, that's entirely consistent with what one would do in seeking a development in any case. This would be absolutely normal. There was nothing not normal about that. But I did say...
about the size of this project. This project was of the order of a 400 million project. This was clearly high risk, right?
Deputy Donald, if I could just finish my answer to that, because I do want to make the final comment on it. The very fact that another developer was brought in at the last moment, we rejected that. This was not something, you say it was rushed, there was no rushing because we rejected that immediately. There was no rushing in the 21 days of evaluation that we did between the 3rd and the 24th of October. And there is nothing in the documentation here that suggests that because of a rush, there was some issue missed. These were professional assessments of what we were getting into. And I honestly don't know where, Deputy, you got the word vanity project.
I'm making the point.
It's an extraordinary...
If you take it a normal commercial criteria, and I appreciate you've come before us, but obviously you'll appreciate that the robustness of argument will always stand up. And so we have to put questions. And what profit, like, I suppose I'm coming back to all the time the return. Did you get any projections on the level of profit you'd make from the project if it was going ahead?
Yes. All the valuations contain a level of profit.
What was the level of profit?
15% of the value of the development.
15%?
Correct.
And did you do any due diligence on that? Because you were a minority shareholder in this proposal. Did you carry out any due diligence regarding that 15%?
Absolutely, because the best business case that one can do in purchasing property is professional evaluations based on
worked out for you?
Well, first of all, we had the professional independent valuation in 2005. Then on our team, we had professional certified RICS surveyors.
Now, that's on the value of the property, but did you get anyone who actually sat down and crunched the figures?
The valuers, the trained valuers on our team. We had trained valuers in our property team who had been valuing property for 10 years in that. This was a property company who had been operating for 10 years, had developed up to then the biggest site in Docklands of themselves and made 130 million profit on it. So there was a lot of experience here. This was not vanity. This was a very, very experienced team.
The eventual project was 412 million, and you're saying 15%. So you were looking at a profit of 62 million.
Yes.
And you ended up basically with a loss.
It's not the 15% of the sum paid for the site.
Well, what
It's
profit?
15% of the entire development. Because of course, what we haven't mentioned is development funding, which would come.
Your investment in it was a total. What profitability? What figure were you looking at? What had you projected a profit?
I don't have it in front of me, but it was something in the order of 200 to 300 million of the total profit out of the final extruded development, which would be over a
How
number
much
of
was
years.
the DDA? What
26%.
26% of 200 million.
Correct.
So you were looking at the order of 52 million.
Correct.
Which was the same. Ironically, ended up being was the loss-making figure. So it was a turnaround of 104 million.
No, I mean, the profits come after your expenditure. You get your equity back.
No. What I'm more interested in is 52 million was lost on the project. When you were looking at the project, what net profit, what money were you looking at coming into the DDA?
An additional, having paid off our investment, which was 52 million, having paid that off, another 50 million coming back into the authority. But
50 million of profit.
But if you, Donald, this was a company who plows its profits back into the development. So our profit was not in cash. Our profit was that 20% of this site would be social and affordable housing taken out of our products, out of our profits. Secondly, all the developments that we are insisting on the site, for example, in the agreement is a 10 million community investment. This was taken out of our profits and so on. So our net profit might have been 52 cash, but our profit to the state, to the community, to the area was multiples of that. That's what we were interested in, not the cash profit. If we broke even on that site, and naturally that was not our intention, but if we did, there would still have been an enormous profit to what we gave to the community in that. And that's where we were coming from.
Okay. Deputy Murphy, have you?
Thank you, Chair.
I'd say what we'll do is maybe 10 minutes. Is that sufficient?
I'll try and get there in 10, but I just want to, Mr. Maloney said he's been waiting 4 years. I want to give him the fullest opportunity to put everything on the record that he wants to. You discussed Derek Quillen in the meeting of the 2nd of November. And then at the 7th of December, I think it's discussed again. But in that context, Derek Quillen is now a part of the consortium and lending is being arranged. So was that the period of time in which the board then agreed that this was going to be acceptable based on the conditions that its own, I think the different conditions were made in terms of the authority's own shareholdings not being diluted in terms of...
Yes, I mean, it was a period between that the board found it acceptable, and because the paper of the 2nd of November, I don't think you have it, gave the positive and negatives of that. And the decision of the 2nd of November, the board meeting of the 2nd of November, which is there, following discussion on all, thank you, following discussion on all issues involved, the board agreed they would have no objection to Bernard McNamara disposing of his 33%. Now that was following probably an hour-long discussion. However, the board was not prepared to agree, and this was crucial, to a dilution of its currently agreed 40% of directors. The board would agree to an increase in the number of directors, blah, blah, blah. So where the board was now coming from is, yes, they could see the value of a mitigation of risk. However, we had already, Chairman, agreed the heads of terms, which confirmed our community gain, confirmed all of our planning issues, so Mr. Quillen could not dilute those heads of terms. In other words, the criteria that we set down were already set in stone. So that made the board more comfortable that Mr. Quinlan could come on board, because he could not have effect on our criteria as laid down in that multiple document. However, what he might have had an effect on was dilution of our 26%, which we resisted.
We then moved from a period, December, the year end, we moved to January 2007. And if you look through the different board meetings of the board, through that year actually, brief mention in January, there's a brief mention in February, something to do with a bank guarantee which was redacted in the minutes I received. Would you normally redact minutes for board meetings?
Very, very seldom.
Okay, but you would do it? For the public record, elements would be redacted?
I can only think if there was something of a very commercially sensitive nature.
Because in February there's a paragraph on the bank guarantee and that's redacted. In March there's a paragraph on the capital gains tax, that's completely redacted. In April we get an update on tax planning. In May there's a complaint to SIPO is mentioned in the board meeting about it. There's a complaint to the Standards in Public Office.
Yes.
Is raised in May 2007. That was to do with a conflict of interest. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you remember the details of that?
Yes.
Was it in relation to the glass bottle site?
It wasn't in relation to the glass bottle site.
What was it in relation
It was
to?
in relation to, and I think Mr. Bradshaw may have dealt with it. It was in relation to Mr. Bradshaw in advance of my arrival at the board, in relation to the Board of Anglo and so on. I don't have the details of it.
Okay.
I do know that during my time there, SIPO had made a judgment on it that said the claimant was not upheld.
In relation to Mr. Bradshaw in terms of his position on the board of Anglo-Irish?
I believe so in relation to that, but I don't want to, in fairness,
No, in fairness, and
go too far into that because he did have his opportunity here.
I don't think we have the time either because we are pressed. There's nothing in the minutes of board meetings for May, June, July. There's no August meeting. Nothing in September or October or November on this this deal. From what I see at the board, like the board didn't discuss this for the entire, from May in 2007. Is that not unusual given how the large scale of the deal? I mean, how significant it was. You've just completed it.
No, because at that stage we were into what paragraph 3.2 of the heads of terms say were the planning stages. And until, real hard facts and information emerged from that, there was really no particular issue to bring to the board, and that may explain that.
December 2007, it appears back on the minutes again for board meetings. It's to do with site clearance and remediation works. But unfortunately, the minutes I have are partly redacted.
Well, I can think of absolutely no reason why at this stage you should have redacted minutes.
And then in January 2008, issues requiring ongoing funding for remediation works are noted in the minutes. It's asked that IGB is placed back on the agenda for all future meetings. Why was that? Someone in the January board meeting said we've got to discuss this issue at all future board meetings.
Because now we were coming to the implementation of the heads of terms under planning, and that included remediation. So we now had issues that we were going to bring to every meeting at that stage.
But were you worried? Were people worried at that point in time, at the beginning of 2008?
Well, I think in the beginning of 2008, the emergence of what was happening in the market, you may remember, was worrying a lot of people.
Site itself and the cost of remediation and financing that.
Yes, well, there was a full board discussion and board paper on that. In the valuations that we had done, there was a €60 million allocation for remediation, so we always knew it was an issue. I can't recall of anything unusual in that discussion, that unless there's something you want to raise with me, I just can't think of anything.
I just want to make a final point of this before we go to the final issue I wanted to address. From February, the IGB is back on the Irish Glass Bottle side, is back in the minutes of the board. But most of it, the records I have, are redacted. Now, just what I request is that perhaps you might come back to the committee in whatever formal correspondence you're having.
Yes.
If you've got those board minutes, that you could send them on, or you could at least explain if there are redactions, why they are there.
We can ask the DA directly for
Well, that'd be great, yeah, because I'm just not sure if the copy I got had certain redactions. Yeah. And just the final issue, Chair, and thank you for indulging with the time, because it was discussed in detail with Ms. Moylan and with the CNAG. It was in relation to a cap that was put in place, a liability that was a time period liability of 2 years that was then lifted when the guarantee was renegotiated. Is my understanding, I think.
Yes.
What happened there?
Well, first of all, the cap was for a liability of a 26 million recourse loan and 2 years of interest. What we paid was a 29 million of recourse loan, recourse guarantee, And we said we'd pay 2 years interest, and we stopped paying after 2 years interest. Now, why was that? Because in the, and this is where, Controller, I will obviously disagree with you. The way it's presented in the Controller's report looks like the cap was on the investment that the authority was making. The investment the authority was making, Chairman, was in 2 tranches. One, its liabilities for the loan, which was 26 million plus its investment, plus interest. And secondly was the 32 million equity it put into the company. And that's clear in the shareholders' agreement. But the way it is worded, and some of the press is reported here, that we had capped everything at 35 million. Now, I know the Controller in other parts of the report has clarified that, but in just those 2 sentences, and that's why I opened it in my statement. However, where the Controller is absolutely right, is that we set 2 years of paying interest. Why? Because in another paragraph, I think it's 3.4 of the shareholders' agreement, it says that planning will take 2 years. There was a limit placed on planning for 2 years. And why was that limit placed on planning? Because every development, if you buy, in this case, an unplanned or unzoned site, you have a period after which you get planning when the equity and value of that site changes enormously. You now create value. The intention there, and that's what's in the shareholders' agreement, is that value would create it after 2 years. You then had 2 means of getting equity and paying for your interest.
Was bought.
It was zoned high amenity, residential, commercial, it had all of that.
Question over its zoning.
No, the zoning was absolutely fine, but no one had attempted to go for planning. So when we had set a 2-year timescale for interest...
Pre-planning before, did you seek any pre-planning before you made a bid on the site?
I know, we had 20 days, we couldn't. But what we did have, Chairman...
But that's only pick up the phone and ring the planners.
We were the planners for the site.
Okay, see, there was no...
So we had an extensive document, this is why I referred to it, a master plan, extensively dealing with all the infrastructure, all the amenities, all the issues to do with that site.
Part 8, you were effectively giving
Correct.
yourselves permission.
Correct. And this is why I say to the Controller, this was our business case. We had that done. Now, when it came to the 2 years interest, and the Controller is absolutely correct on this, we set a 2-year limit paying that interest, and we did, and we stopped. Because after the 2 years when planning would come, we would then create value or release equity. 2 ways of doing that. The bank would accrue the interest and we wouldn't be paying until the final development came. Or the second method, which was discussed many times, was to probably, it was a huge site, 26 acres, start divesting ourselves of parcels. That's why we set 2 years. It was never intended, and that's why we didn't break that cap, it was never intended that after 2 years, we'll stop paying and someone else will pay our 26% of the interest. Because if that was the case, our 2 partners turned around and said, well, we're paying 74% of our proportion. You have a liability for your 26%. We never divested ourselves of the ultimate liability, though I totally acknowledge that the Controller General has correctly written what is there. But you have to take these other paragraphs into account. And there's a 3rd paragraph in the shareholders' agreement, and that is the reason the cap was put in is that any development costs, and there were over several hundred million of development costs to develop a site of this magnitude, they would only come from our partners. The DDA were setting a cap that they would not involve themselves in that, which we also clearly adhere to. So when Deputy Murphy asked me, why did we increase that for another 2 years? Our liability was always there. We decided not to pay any further. And the Controller mentions a figure of 8.5 million, correctly, that we now increased that liability to over those 2 years. We didn't pay it. I totally accept it's a liability, but I accept that it's a liability based on the actual facts that we were always liable for 26% of our interest. That's where that comes from.
Thank you for the clarification. I don't know if the CNAD wants to comment on that. I just have one final question.
Well, maybe we'll take your final question and we'll let the Controller General make these.
It's just a general question, Mr. Maloney. If you look at the CNAD's report on this and his findings, he does criticise the keeping of records around these events. I just want to know if you wanted to make a comment on that as the former CEO.
Because he has not acknowledged my opening statement that the minutes of the board meeting are the most comprehensive legal record one can find in any semi-state body. And that's why I disagree.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll call on Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. And maybe just on that point, I certainly agree that the minutes of the board are the most important record. But I don't feel that the minutes of DDDA give an adequate reflection of all of the issues that were involved here. So I think that's the point I would make.
Disagree on that,
and we will disagree. We will disagree on it. I think that there's just a couple of other points that I would like to make in relation to what Mr. Maloney has raised in his opening statement, and sort of one or two of them are tangential to the core issue we've been talking about. I'd like to draw attention of the committee to the financial position of the DDDA at the end of 2012. I pointed out in my audit certificate in relation to it, I drew attention to, first of all, the dissolution of the authority, which is planned. But I also drew attention to a deferred pension funding asset being recognised in the financial statements. And I'd like to read that. I draw attention to note 16 to the financial statements and to the recognition, as at the 31st of December 2012, of an asset of €8.4 million in respect of deferred pension funding. The recognition of the asset reflects the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform's statement in July 2013 that the state will bear the authority's pension liabilities on its dissolution. And if you look at the balance sheet of the authority at that date, it shows total assets less current liabilities of €5 million, which had the authority ceased to exist on the 31st of December 2012, and had succeeded in disposing of all its assets and clearing all its liabilities, there would be a net €5 million to return to the Exchequer. However, the Exchequer taking on the liability for €8.4 million of pension liabilities into the future, and that's an estimate of what those liabilities will be. There isn't, if you like, that transfers with the surrender of the assets, so there's actually a net Exchequer cost in relation to that. I don't want to make a big point around...
You're absolutely correct. That's 2010.
Controller conclude, and then by all means...
I don't want to make a big point about it, but I do think it's important that the committee be aware of this, because the 2012 financial statements will be before you. I think it's scheduled for February, and just to draw attention to that.
The net effect at the conclusion, what is the state taken on its balance sheet in terms of DDDA at the end of December 2012?
The estimate would be a net €3.4 million.
Deficit.
Okay. The other point to make just about the cost and so on, Mr. Maloney has pointed out that the shareholder equity and loans that were provided and the interest paid amounted to a figure of just under €44 million. But there was a more extended liability, as you've outlined, which a settlement was done with NAMA, and the result was assets with a value of, I think, €7.8 million were transferred to NAMA. So to get the overall cost to the DDDA of the venture, you have to add the two things together, and that gives you the figure of €52 million. So it's not inconsistent with what Mr. Maloney has presented, but just in case there's any confusion about that. I think I would also like to draw attention to the heads of agreement, a paper which was presented to the authority, the executive board of the authority, on the 2nd of November, and it outlines the shareholdings of the share distribution between the authority at 26% and the other partners at 74%. And it goes on to state all rights, interests, liabilities, obligations, responsibilities and risks, and all costs incurred or losses shall, except as expressly agreed otherwise, be shared and borne in such proportions. provided always that the total recourse to the DDDA under any loans to the joint venture company, guarantees, or on any account whatsoever in respect of the acquisition of the company or otherwise, shall not in aggregate exceed 35 million euros. And that was the basis of, if you like, this was considered by the board on that day, and that is the basis of our stating in the report that the authority believed at the time it was giving approval for the signing of the shareholders' agreement that its financial commitment would be limited to 35 million euros. Now, I certainly accept that the shareholders' agreement that actually was signed subsequently did extend that liability, but I'm just drawing attention to that in the context of the record kept by the Dublin Docklands.
Mr. Maloney.
Chairman, thank you. The 3.5 million deficit that the authority could be handing back to the Exchequer is by no means finalised. Why? Because today it continues to sell what are increasingly valuable assets, highly sought after now. What's happening in Docklands is quite extraordinary in the property market. So that final figure next February will know of that, and I believe it will not be a deficit, but I defer to the accounts in February of next year.
I accept that.
Thank you.
Completely.
On the figure of 35 million, we all agree now that it was a funding guarantee liability to do with recourse and interest. It was not, at the time of the shareholders' agreement, the 32 million for equity was also in that shareholders' agreement. So the authority knew it had the 35 million liability plus the 32 million equity. Do you accept that?
No, I don't.
So you're saying that the authority didn't know it was paying equity, even though 2 minutes of the meeting showed it had to pay equity?
Well, I mean, can you refer me to the
I
position
can,
in the
and
agreement?
I have evidence of this, Chairman, and I don't want to take up the time. I believe, honestly, Controller, you're fundamentally wrong on this, and I will prove this. I have, as part of my time, and I came back from abroad to spend time looking at all these files, and I will produce the evidence. But more importantly than that, I asked to communicate with you to clarify. You correctly said you couldn't clarify anything with me in advance of this meeting. I understand you couldn't. So therefore I went to the next source of all the information, the DDA, current Director of Finance. I asked him to set down for me that table. He has done so. I will submit this table. It shows unequivocally that at the time of the shareholders' agreement, which is your statement, the financial commitments of the authority, financial commitments were twofold. One, the recourse funding cap of 35 million. We both agree on that. And number two, and he has in his document, which I've asked him to confirm for me in writing, and he has. I asked him to confirm it in writing to you, and he said he would. So, Chairman, I will ask that...
Well, what we suggest is that the clerk would link up and we get it independently verified.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to make a final statement, Chairman, before we go. Thank you very much. First of all, Chairman, I cannot emphasise enough I would spend 10 hours here if you wanted me to. Because for 4 years I've been denied any access to the Brennan reports which he was producing. Me or the Chairman or the previous executive. That is not governance. What the Public Accounts Committee has shown to the media here, the way to do it, and I congratulate the CNAG, is an independent report to get the facts. We might disagree on some of them, but it's independent, and then to bring everybody here and question them and have them accountable. This is the right way in the democratic function of this state to do it, and I congratulate you on that. What I only ask is that Ms. Brennan has said she won't appear before here until everybody else appears. Now, here's a person who's had every chance to write every report, and I'm here before you. I would therefore like to come back here when Ms. Brennan appears, so that I'm here to correct the record, to ensure that my evidence is heard, and to ensure that no further disinformation is given. But overall, I thank the Controller. I thank you for your patience today. I think your questioning has been very fair and rightly so rigorous. So thank you, Chairman.
The committee obviously will consider your request. We thank you for appearing before us. I think in generally, as a macro level, it has cost the state money to the tune of 52 million. We may differ, but generally in terms of projects on the ground, clearly from the evidence we've received, I would feel that on a business model, there was lack of cohesion in the decision making in terms, I feel, that the independent valuation in terms of the property, proper due diligence, clearly it was rushed. But I think it's something that we as a committee will continue to take up. We will be considering the DDA's 2012 accounts on the 6th of February next year. And we thank you, Mr. Maloney, for appearing before us. And Julie, the committee is now